significant action on climate change. There is a lot of evidence now that this has been going on for 20 years at least now. In fact, a very recent book just published this year is a book called A Requiem for a Species by Clive Hamilton, a scholar at the Australian National University, talking about why this denial thing is happening. In fact, it's called A Requiem for a Species, Why We Resist the Truth About Climate Change.
Why do we resist the truth about climate change?
Because of this mentality called denial. And the difference between a skeptic and a denialist is a skeptic will change his mind when the evidence is better or there's new evidence. But a denialist will not change his mind no matter what the evidence is.
They deny on what basis? What is the basis on which this denial takes place?
It's hard to know. One thing is that they feel that when there is a global crisis or a national crisis, it gives governments more power to act. And these very, very conservative people absolutely detest the idea that the government should do anything or should have power.
Detesting the concept of intervention of government.
Exactly.
But do you see a climate challenge as a scenario of market failure which justifies the intervention of the government?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, the very famous report, the Stern report, which was the report on climate economics written by Lord Stern in the UK about 3 years ago, in it he said that the market failure, he said climate change is the greatest and wide-ranging market failure ever seen. So in other words,
but this is looking at it from a more economics perspective. Do you want to explain to the audience how we can relate the market failure to the climate change so that it will give us an idea as to how we can place it in the context of market failure?
Right. I mean, carbon pollution is the problem. So we burn fossil fuels, we burn forests, and the carbon escapes into the atmosphere, and that's changing the CO2 levels, which is increasing the temperature of the planet, and that is creating climate instability. So that's the mechanism. And why is this carbon allowed to burn? Because the social cost, the environmental cost of that carbon is not reflected in the price of goods, because industry is allowed to burn carbon with no penalty, and the costs are being accumulated in terms of planetary climate destruction. So that's the failure, that the true cost is not reflected in the price of goods produced. And how can we correct this? Well, it's the role of government to intervene. And for example, they could impose a carbon tax. And if you had a tax of $80 per ton of carbon emitted, it would dramatically change the behavior of all companies, and that carbon price will be reflected in all goods and services. So the whole economy would adjust to take into account that new reality, and that is the kind of intervention that we need from governments. So there are different ways to do that. There are carbon trading systems as opposed to a carbon tax, and there's a lot of discussion as to which is better. Ultimately, it doesn't matter which way we do it, so long as we do it, so that there is a price to pay when you pollute.
Right, Satis, we will take a small break and we will be back with you soon.